It's 11 o'clock. We're going to start our weekly webinar, our weekly update on coronaviruses. We're absolutely delighted to have all of you here. This is a weekly update on the coronaviruses. We're bringing world-class resources and experts to talk to the Hispanic leadership community, to talk to us so that we can be informed about what is the latest on the coronavirus, what is the latest information, both in health, in politics, in economy, in businesses, and best practices. This is going to be something that we do every week at 11 o'clock EST Tuesdays. We're going to bring all these resources so that we can be informed, so that we can share this information, and so that we can take better decisions. I cannot be more grateful for all of you to be here, for our speakers, world-class experts on areas that are going to be informing our community. This is a way in which we're going to start this conversation. This is the way this is going to run. We have 30 minutes. We have 6 experts that are going to be talking about different areas. All the comments and questions that you have to do it through chat. We will not have, this is not going to be interactive. This is going to be an information call. And we're going to start now. I'm very, very grateful for the incredible speakers that we have. I'm going to name them now. Dr. David Nabarro, who's a special envoy of the World Health Organization for COVID-19, my former boss. We have Bret, an op-ed columnist of the New York Times. We have Gillian Tett, the chair and editorial board of the Financial Times. Cristina Antelo, principal Ferox strategist. LeRoy Cavazos from the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And Jesus Mantas from IBM, managing partner. We're going to start this conversation by playing a video from Dr. David Nabarro that today just recorded a video, couldn't be with us, but we will be with us in every other week. Michelle, let's play the video from Dr. David Nabarro.
And I work as the Special Envoy of the World Health Organization Director General. I'm one of 6. And what we're doing is amplifying and interpreting the guidance of the World Health Organization in relation to the pandemic caused by the new coronavirus. We've known about this virus for 4 months. And each day we're learning more and more about how serious the situation is. As we try to reduce the impact of the pandemic, we have to focus on the virus. And everywhere where the virus is spreading, we need to be able to interrupt transmission. That means isolating people who have the disease. Ideally, we know about their status from testing, but in many settings now, tests are not available. So we have to be ready to isolate based on the symptoms of the disease, which, as you probably know, are high fever, dry cough, often sore throat, shortness of breath, and chest pain. And we also know that out of every 100 people, about 20% get quite ill, and unfortunately, a few of those do not survive. So that's why it's so important, as well as isolating people with the disease and interrupting transmission, we also pay special attention to health services and the safety of health workers, many of whom are exposed to the disease in their work. In order to reduce the opportunities for transmission, governments everywhere are introducing either shelter-at-home policies or lockdowns. These are important because if you introduce them quickly, you can reduce the spread of disease. If you wait and only introduce them after the disease has been spreading for some weeks, then the problems are very severe and the lockdowns tend to be longer. But the lockdowns carry with them huge consequences, particularly for people who are poorer and who depend on wages earned every day for their well-being, and often they don't have savings. These people are particularly at risk of becoming poorer and being disadvantaged by lockdowns. The situation in the world is that the disease is spreading globally, very rapidly. The outbreaks double in size every 2.5 days, unless there is interruption of transmission and widespread physical distancing through lockdowns, then the spread can be slowed and health services can be got ready. But saying all the time that we're seeing situation in the United States emerging as a really serious one with widespread community transmission of the virus. And so we're saying to everybody in the United States that it will be necessary to cope with the lockdowns and other restrictions on movement for some weeks to come. We're asking leaders everywhere to recognize that the control measures do lead to considerable difficulty for poorer people. And having looked at some studies in New York metropolitan area, I'm understanding that Hispanic people are particularly affected in that region. And I understand, therefore, that you, as leaders of the Hispanic community, will want to do everything you can to support people. Here are the things to look out for. Loss of income, in the home, meaning leading to challenges in the home with supporting the household and looking after children. Caring for older people. Many Hispanic people have got older relatives and they need to protect their relatives because they are most at risk. Being able to get food. Many Hispanic people don't have big savings and can't stock up on food. So they're dependent on going to get food every day. And they're already finding that some shops lack food. So we've got to do everything possible to protect access to food. And then many Hispanic people are working in health services. It's really important they're protected and enabled to look after themselves with personal protective equipment. And if that's not available, then they need to be very, very careful. As we look forward to the future, I think we have to recognize that these lockdowns will go on for a bit. I don't think they're going to stop in the United States in just a week or two. I think they'll be with us for a bit. So please make sure there's solidarity at community level to look after people who are becoming poorer, who are getting distressed, and to make sure older people are not isolated. You can do everything with people if you stay more than 2 meters away from them. You can deliver them food. You can make sure they got water. You can make sure they got their medicines. And community solidarity is going to be the key to ensuring that communities survive and stay strong, whilst at the same time keeping themselves safe and all the time trying to interrupt transmission everywhere. I think that the longer term will be a tricky one because this virus is not going to disappear suddenly. We're not just going to go back to normal as it was. We'll have to be always on the lookout for new cases of this disease in every community. Until there is a vaccine to protect us all, that's the new reality. It's being alert for COVID. And that means that we have to have very good networks in our communities to keep an eye on everybody and to pick up those who are in difficulty. All the time we have to look after our older people or people with other diseases because they're most at risk. We've got to make sure that they can be got to hospital quickly and cared for if they're very ill. And perhaps most importantly, we will remember that our health is the most precious asset, that only we working with our community members, our neighbors, our friends, only we can look after our health. But in this case, it's more than that. We can look after our own health, but our behavior with regard to this disease determines how the whole of society will respond. If we can all work together in solidarity, one big human family, we can conquer this pandemic and limit its consequences for ourselves, our families, our businesses, and our nations. But if we find it hard to work together, and if we're split by differences, then things get muddled, and then the disease will advance, and we will all suffer. So I encourage you, solidarity at the community level is the heart of it. Health workers are the most important people at the moment to ensure our security. Governments are key because they've got to provide us all with very clear direction and not give us false hopes. But most importantly, you, community leaders, will be the ones who carry us through. Thank you for the chance to talk with you. Gracias. Obrigada. Wonderful. Thank you.
And that goes, a big thank you to Dr. David Nabarro, Bret Stephens, New York Times columnist. You, David, just spoke about how important it is solidarity. We're following a path, and the reason why we did changed around and created this Hispanic response and recovery plan was to move from health, understanding that we're dealing with health as the now. We have to go into solidarity so that we can create a path for recovery. This is a clearinghouse for information and action, trying to get as many people as possible informed so that we can share information and start activating and creating a plan so that we, disproportionately affected Hispanic small businesses, entrepreneurs, independent workers, can go back and get on our feet when we can. Bret, what has been the political implication of COVID? How do we see it? What's the world implication about all of these? And then if you can just end with how do we actually see for Hispanics looking at the impact, for example, now that Mexico has been declared a state of emergency?
Ok, pues buenos días, Claudia. Es un placer estar con ustedes. I look at this crisis as a kind of Fukushima situation writ large in the following sense. You'll recall that the Fukushima nuclear disaster was preceded by a tsunami which took thousands of Japanese lives. So there was first a natural disaster followed by a secondary disaster, which if anything had implications that were at least equally large and hazardous both to people's economic well-being, but also to their health. What happened in Japan tragically 9 years ago this month, last month, is now happening on a global scale. And I think the most important thing for community leaders to recognize is just the scale of this event. We keep thinking that in another few weeks, we're going to put this past us. I'm afraid that we may be at the very beginning of a global crisis. We have to think not only in terms of our communities, but we also have to think in terms of the communities to which we are connected, both because this is a global crisis. This is the way that this disease spreads, but it also spreads for economic reasons. And I think that's important to bear in mind. We are, as I see it, only at the early stages of the global health crisis, not in the middle ones, but at the very earliest ones. Partially, this is a problem of reporting, Claudia. We are getting fairly or more comprehensive reporting in terms of the scale of the outbreak in developed countries, although far from adequate. But in places like Latin America, in places like Central and Eastern Europe, in places like the Middle East, reporting is very seriously inadequate, and we're only beginning to get a sense of just how serious the scale is. The second issue that concerns me, in the United States, we've talked about how we wasted a precious month not locking down, not becoming more prepared, not doing adequate testing. But think about Russia, or think about my own country, Mexico. It was only yesterday that Mexico declared a state of emergency. That is too little. That is like preparing for the storm when it's already begun, when the rain has already started. It is too late. It's a similar situation in Russia. I'm just mentioning these two otherwise different countries to suggest that they are very much in the same place. And I am afraid that we are on the eve of tragedies in many countries throughout the developing world. We've spent a lot of time thinking about what's happening here in America or in Europe or in Asia, but this is going to spread, and it's going to be that much more devastating in nations whose health provisions, health systems are not as developed as they are here. So this is something that we ought to be thinking about, and especially Hispanic leaders connected to the Hispanic world, to the extent that this looming crisis over Latin America can be brought more thoroughly to light. I think this is an important public information challenge, something that we ought to be thinking about. You asked about political consequences. One of the things that I fear and this is starting to come to light, is that a global health pandemic is going to provide a very good alibi for leaders around the world to try to assert powers that are not given to them in the ordinary course of things. We're seeing this happening in Hungary. There was an attempt in Israel. Even Prime Minister Trudeau was thinking about this. So it's not just simply, it's happening throughout the world. And how we balance civil liberties with a public health emergency is going to be particularly important, especially when aggressive leaders or leaders bent on expanding their powers have this, what seems like a rock solid excuse to crack down on all forms of opposition in the name of public health. There is a global paradox at work here, Claudia, and the paradox is this. Around the world, from my home in Manhattan to people in Bologna and Milano, to people in the Far East, we're all sort of going through this together. You know, you see I'm in my daughter's bedroom behind me. We are stuck in our home. So in an experiential sense, we have almost never been more united against a common threat that cuts across all forms of ideological, political, or other forms of division. On the other hand, frightfully, the pandemic is becoming an excuse or a reason to impose a series of divisions in the name of containment that I think may be as decisive a blow against what we used to call globalization or freedom for immigration, trade, other forms of interchange, as we've seen in practically the last century. So the paradox of all of us, there's the paradox of all of us experiencing a similar or having a similar experience while moving into a world of ever greater fragmentation. One more point that I want to mention, and this is, I think this is important. Here in the United States, the community that really worries me the most is the migrant community, especially undocumented migrants. They're the ones whose jobs typically, whose livelihoods typically depend on being able to go to a work site day in and day out. They're the ones who probably have the least amount of accumulated savings because they do not have access to usual facilities for saving and storing money in banks and other other venues. And there are millions, tens of millions of undocumented migrant workers here in the United States who are shut out of the health system, fearful for their livelihoods, fearful for their relatives, fearful for their futures. And I think we need to really mobilize an effort to take care of this population, not least because their fears for their immediate livelihoods make them, might dispose them to take chances with their health and therefore public health. So this is really, I think, an opportunity for community leaders to really focus on this issue. And if there is any silver lining to this, it might be that both for reasons of public health and for human, for economic well-being, we can actually start to think much more sensibly about the role of our undocumented migrants here in the United States.
Bret, thank you so much. I hope that next week, next Tuesday, when we have you back, we can discuss more how you have seen that paradox as well of people, you know, like the pandemic, uniting us and making us more human, but also dividing us. So thank you so much for being with us, Gillian Tett. Gillian, the chair of the editorial board of the Financial Times. Gillian, again, 60 million Hispanics in America, 18% of the population were massively affected. The small businesses, entrepreneurs, massively affected. Small businesses, Hispanic small businesses together are 10% of the GDP of the country. Can you give us in 5-6 minutes, Gillian, please, in 5 or 6 minutes, can you give us a sense of what is the economic implication? What is the economic implication of COVID? How is trade affected? And when do you think business is going to be back to normal, at least for, you know, like for the country? And how would you react as, you know, like as Hispanic business owner? What can we think about? What are the intelligent decisions that we should be making now? Gillian, Tett.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Claudia. And I should start by saying that I agree with pretty much everything that Bret just said. I have good and bad news. The bad news is that this is an unprecedented economic shock for America. There are parallels initially being drawn with 2008. In some ways, it's worse than that. In many ways, it's worse than that. You really have to go back to 1929 to see something on this magnitude. And just this morning, we've had new estimates coming out from Goldman Sachs that second quarter GDP will decline on an annualized basis by 35%. We've had estimates coming out from the Federal Reserve that you could be looking at an unemployment rate of over 30% soon. So these are desperately bad numbers, which frankly, most people can barely even compute because they are so shocking by the standards of history. And there's a lot of discussion right now about whether it's going to be a V-shaped decline or a U-shaped decline or an L-shaped decline, what I call the LUV, LUV debate, although there's not a lot of love involved in it. And by that I mean people are saying, well, maybe we'll go down so dramatically in the coming months that we will bounce up again quickly. Maybe we'll go down, stay down for a while and then come back up like a U-shaped. Or maybe we're going to go down and basically stay down for such a long time that it looks like a capital L instead. The honest answer is we just don't know. We really don't know. My best guess, it's probably going to be more like a U-shaped, but that's with a very big caveat, which is that I think this shock is not just causing a sudden stop and massive economic disruption. It's also likely to have more lasting impacts in terms of the way that business is structured. You know, I would question whether, say, the airline industry is ever going to come back to the level it was before. I would question whether the type of, entertainments we're looking at are going to come back. I would think that the digital services that people are starting to appreciate and the delivery services which people are starting to rely on are going to become increasingly entrenched as part of our lives. So if you're a business person at the moment, the bad news is you need to recognize this is a tremendously damaging shock to the economy, and we cannot just wish that away. And you also need to recognize that the fundamental structure of many parts of American consumption and behavior are probably going to change, and it won't go back to normal or as it was before once the recovery starts. But in that very scary outlook, there is hope, because businesses which are agile and which are able to start trying to reposition themselves quickly and look for opportunities may well find that actually there are some very interesting new ways they can pivot and adapt in the future. And the other point I'd make is that we're seeing a completely unprecedented response from the White House in terms of the stimulus package. Now, the part which is probably most relevant to your audience is the $350 billion odd of support, which is supposed to be forthcoming for businesses in terms of providing loans if they keep workers and things like that. It's still, unfortunately, completely unclear how that will work. And there is an enormous amount of work going on inside Washington around this. There's a lot of uncertainty. But the other messages I'd say at the moment are that if you are a small business owner right now, find out now what these SBA's operations are, what their conditions of operation are. They've been doling out, the Small Business Association, that's a government agency, they've been doling out loans for some time on a very small scale. I mean, they've been giving out about $26 billion of loans a year recently. They have a whole bunch of internal forms. It is likely that whatever emerges from Washington will partly be emerging through the SBA. So if you are a small business owner, find out where your nearest SBA office is, find out the website, start having a look.
Yeah. We have actually the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce representative here that,
okay. Well,
that demonstrate. Yeah, but tell us a little bit, Gillian, about just timeline. When are we going to start seeing the light again?
Well, the reality is that markets don't operate well with uncertainty. And unfortunately, in the current environment, until there is better clarity on the medical trends, there will be uncertainty. So you're unlikely to see much in the way of a strong recovery in the markets, financial markets, until we either have mass testing or a vaccine that's actually coming down the cracks quickly, or some sign that the disease is possibly peaking. So that's unlikely to emerge for another month or two. In terms of the economy, it all depends on when they reopen. And you will have heard Scott Gottlieb this morning saying that he reckons the peak may be late April, May. We may be back to normal by July, August. People I'm speaking to are saying basically September, if we're lucky, will be when the country really starts reopening properly. That's a long time away.
That's a long time away. And nevertheless, I think that what we should do is just plan around that time. Locally, it's Hispanic Heritage Month, so we can actually like tie that up to the recovery. Gillian said, thank you so much for being with us. I would like to invite Cristina Antelo, Principal Ferox Strategies, to share actually with us in a couple of minutes, what is the latest on the policy? What's happening in Washington that could be affecting Hispanics that we should know about, so that our leaders, Hispanic leaders, can know what the policies and what are the bills that could be affecting us and that we should be aware of. Thank you so much, Gillian. Hello, Cristina.
Several policy fronts that are coming online now. We've seen in the government response. I'll take just one correction to what Gillian said there. Otherwise, she's completely right. But instead of saying the White House, I would offer up Congress. I think that there was a very, very vigorous negotiation in the Senate, in the House, between Republicans with Democrats, and I think ultimately we've come up with a package that is much better off than what we started off with. There are a lot more provisions in there for workers. I think that there are a lot of provisions in there that are meant to benefit the economic response, and I'm using the word response very purposely because I think that the next phase becomes the recovery. There is a great deal of thought that is going into the response to what is happening right now, not only on the medical side, but also on the economic side that Gillian so eloquently talked about, a two-pronged approach that is happening right now in our society. That negotiation that has happened just last week culminated in what we here in DC are calling as a shorthand Corona 3. The Corona 3 package, over $2.2 trillion in response and relief, that is designed to basically open up liquidity that has seized up for all of the small businesses and larger businesses that hold a different place in our economic society here, and be able to provide to protect as many jobs as possible, keep people employed, keep them in their current jobs, and keep our supply chains and our structures as set as possible so that they don't disintegrate, and then we have to rebuild them all, which would take longer, which would take more time and effort, when a lot of them are already open and working in normal, good, efficient ways that we would want to try to provide for. As part of that bill that happened last week, there are a lot of provisions that have been made available for small businesses, and in particular, I wanted to focus on those for Hispanic small businesses. Ferox Strategies, a government relations firm here in Washington, D.C., Latino owned, we've gone through and we have combed through every piece of legislation, and we have created one master document for all small businesses that you can find on our website. You can go to our news, the news tab of our website, and at the bottom you'll see a Corona COVID-19 resource page. It's 12 pages for small businesses specifically, that goes through and talks about the various loan and grant programs. There are several. I just want to specifically mention them so that folks know what to look out for. There is the Paycheck Protection Program that has loan forgivenesses built in. There's over $350 billion in that program accessible to small businesses. So folks should be getting in line for those. We've got all of the requirements that are required, and who's eligible, who's not, what's involved, what you need to do, the timelines involved, the SBA websites that Gillian talked about. We've got links in here to them. And then as well as the programs for forgiveness. So once you've qualified for the loan, what then you need to do to make sure that you also qualify for the forgiveness at the end of it. After that, there's also the economic injury disaster loans with emergency grants. Those are the types of programs that Gillian was talking about, the programs that already existed but now have been buttressed and made stronger in this specific emergency. We also have the enhanced SBA Express loans. Again, those were programs that already existed in smaller amounts, but now they've been buttressed by the SBA, as well as the SBA debt relief program. There are also involved in that program that was signed by the president last week, the COVID-19 specific tax reliefs for small businesses. There are 3 of those. The employee retention tax credit. These members of Congress want desperately for you to keep your employees, and they are willing to pay you 250% of what you pay now in payroll so that you will keep them and continue to pay things like your rents and your utilities so that the rest of the economic society is able to maintain its flow. So they're willing to pay you, again, to pay your workers, even if they're not able to come into work because maybe your stores are closed or something like that. There's also a payroll tax delay, as well as the paid sick and family leave tax credits. So make sure that you're making yourself available of all of those. Again, go to our website. We've got all of these details for you all in one place that you can go through, and it's well explained, and all of the resources where you can access them.
Cristina, thank you so very much. Can we also link your website to the hispanicstar.org? We're trying to make sure that we have one-stop shop for everyone and everything, that we consolidate the resource catalog so that we can put your website link to the hispanicstar.org. Thank you so much. I hope that we can count on you every week, every Tuesday, to give us a weekly update on what is the policy implication, what's happening, and if there's any need for all of us together to go and, like do any lobby or to support what is in our interest. We hope that you would let us know. Thank you so much. I would like to invite Jesus Mantas. Jesus Mantas is a managing partner from IBM. Jesus, you've been, I would like to ask for your comments about business practices, best practices, and personal best practices that you would like to share with us. And for all of you, know that we have LeRoy Cavazos from the U.S. Chamber of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, USHCC, after Jesus Mantas, to give us a little bit more detail about resources for small businesses and entrepreneurs that we can be available. Jesus, what are the best practices you have seen in corporate America? What are the best reactions that you have seen corporate America take? And what can you share about like personal best practices with the community, being a Hispanic leader under these stressful circumstances?
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. I think we have, I guess, the privilege of being a large global company that operates in 170 countries. We have part of our operation in every stage of the curve of COVID-19. So we were at the front line when it was happening in China. We have a big operation in China. We have a big operation in Asia. So we saw the rise of that. And now when that's normalizing, we have that experience, but then we're seeing in every other country that they're now coming. And even if you look in the United States, different states in the United States are at different stages on that curve. So we have a little bit of that perspective of understanding, both edges of the curve and being able to apply that. The very first thing that we did, and I think that, we see every one of the corporations do, is to really ensure the safety and health of all the employees. I think if there is a common unifying theme that we have seen, is that reaction has been very common to priority number one is safety and health of the employees. Once you do that, the next thing that we did is to ensure business continuity for ourselves and for all of our clients. I mean, think about that. What we do for clients is we operate the airlines, we operate the telecommunications companies, we operate the banking infrastructure. So we can't really stop that. We have to keep all the machinery going. So what we did is fortunately, we were very well prepared for a situation of working from home. 97% of the employees globally of the IBM company are actually working from home. 99% of our operations are actually up and running, working from home, no mission critical outages. That gave a lot of confidence to our clients to make sure that they could focus on what they needed to do without having to worry that their operations were going to be disrupted. Third thing that we did is figure out what is it that we can do to actually help society. So we focus a lot of our initiatives on the acceleration of discovery, especially for vaccines and drugs. So with the White House and with the other technology companies, we created the largest ever consumption of high performance computing that has been done, 330 teraflops, which is, basically largest than the largest computer. And we're making that available for free for any institution that really needs to run these very complicated models to match proteins that could actually disrupt the cycle of the virus. So that's up and running. We launched that last week. Second thing that we saw is every citizen is looking for trusted information on an age that is very difficult to know what's true and what's not. So we used our property, the Weather Channel, to make sure that everybody has hyper-local information of COVID exposure and the COVID numbers for their county, right? So when you actually go to the weather app and you look there, you will see a COVID tab that basically tells you not only the cases in the world, but the cases in your county, in your city, so you can better change behavior on what we want people to do, which is social distancing. After we did all of that, then what we are focused right now is to really help. We have identified 7 patterns that our clients are going through in terms of what the adaptation phase of this is. As the prior panelist mentioned here is, we think this is gonna take a longer time than anybody thinks. And we think some of these changes are gonna be more permanent and not just temporary. So how should everybody look at this? The first one that is being stressed that everybody is trying to update is the resiliency of our information technology and business operation. So helping our clients with that. Second one is new cybersecurity risks. The moment that you have now everybody working from home, that means that bad actors can benefit from that situation in bad ways. So we need to almost like improve all your cybersecurity defense system for a much bigger exposure. Third one is everybody's trying to reconfigure both their business operations and technology for cost and efficiency and agility, because you need to be able to move things very quickly. Fourth, which all of us can see in the stores, is to ensure the supply chain continuity. Ensure that supply chains are modeled now for a much higher variability of demand than ever before. We help people with leading and educating people virtually. One of the things that we have is we have tens of millions of people at their homes they can be benefiting of this time to actually learn. But also, how do you maintain them engaged, right? Engagement and culture is at risk. Trust is at risk during this period of time. So how do you do that? We are making sure that everybody can have trusted information and engage clients virtually. Think about that. If you were going to buy a car, well, now you have to buy a car virtually. If you were going to transact in any other way, you have to do that virtually. How do we help everybody get an end-to-end process that can be done virtually? The last but not least one is helping all of the institutions address the public health risks that come with COVID-19, from all the health and human services programs to providers, payers, and life sciences companies, basically adapt to a context that was very different than 3 months ago.
And I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing the seven steps. Thank you for sharing what IBM is doing. I think that what you mentioned is key, which is this is going to take whatever time it takes. It might take longer than we ever wanted, but demand will come back. So we just need to make sure that supply is there. And that's why we need to start creating a joint plan as Hispanics to know that we have to be part of the supply chain today. We cannot go down. We have to continue being, we have to continue having income. And I think that the Congress, according to what Cristina said and Gillian also said, is doing everything possible so that we don't fragment the system and create even a darker way, a recovery path. Thank you so much, Jesus Mantas, for being with us. I hope that we can have you, every week. We're going to have these weekly updates. Last but not least, I want to invite LeRoy Cavazos from the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. LeRoy, a number of small businesses have been, have been benefiting with the number of resources available for their survival. Tell us a little bit more. First of all, I want to congratulate for your incredible background, which is like so cherry trees, like super groovy dooby. But also, can you tell us a little bit more about like what are resources available for small business entrepreneurs? How do they access them? We've been talking about them. How is the response? Are we applying? Do we need more demand?
So thank you so much, Claudia. It's an honor for the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce to be part of this call and updating Latino business leaders across the country on behalf of our board of directors and our president and CEO, Ramiro Cavazos. We have been on the front lines, and our concentration has been making sure that Hispanic and minority-owned small businesses across the country have access to resources that are financially implicating to their bottom line. So Cristina did a very good job of going through what the SBA is doing. The United States Hispanic Chamber released a technical assistance and resource guide that you can find on our website. But aside from that guide, including the stuff that Cristina talked about at the SBA, it also has an entire menu of corporations across the United States who are doing things that are financially implicating to business owners. So whether it be waiving fees, whether it be deferment of payments, whether it be that they've started their own grant programs or their own loan forgiveness programs, there's about an additional 15 to 20 resources on that deck that businesses should go to our website at ushcc.com. It's on our homepage. And you can download that deck and see what resource best fits your business at this time of need, because we know that every single small business is structured differently and has different needs. Therefore, we are trying to put financially implicating resources out there to small businesses. Another thing about this guide is yesterday it was released in Spanish. I think that that's a very critical point, that the USHCC is serving as a leader across the nation in making sure that resources are put out there in Spanish. Nuestra comunidad tiene que comprender cómo acceder a estos recursos. Hay muchos recursos que están expuestos en este momento, pero no todos están expuestos en los dos idiomas. Entonces nosotros en la Cámara de Comercio Hispana sabemos que es nuestra responsabilidad social, tanto como económica, permitir que nuestras pequeñas empresas y el sector empresarial latino pueda acceder a los recursos que van a ayudarles a sus negocios. So
LeRoy,
that's very, yes,
yeah, LeRoy, that's amazing. Can I ask, are we already accessing this information? Are we accessing it? I am afraid I learned data yesterday about like 41% of Hispanics are pretty much on denial of what's happening. So are we already conscious of what's happening and accessing those resources available? And number two, is there any value in doing a joint action so that we can, all of us together, 75 Hispanic organizations together is a lot of power that we can mobilize so that we can give a message that can activate the small businesses to either create more solidarity or to access more the things that we have available that we have not accessed yet?
So I think, Claudia, to answer your question is, are people resonated? Yes, people are concerned and worried. I would say that people are more concerned in the more impacted or affected areas, which obviously we've seen that geography grow as the days have gone by as impacted areas. We do know that on the SBA side, people are applying for the SBA resources. We're getting reports every 72 hours from the SBA based on applications and the different categories that they're categorizing them by. So we are working with the SBA on that. The CARES Act just passed on Friday, so I think that the first report on the CARES Act will be out by the end of this week. Could more people be accessing this information? Yes, obviously more people could be accessing the information, but that's where the 75 organizations that you mentioned, we need to really play a role of two things, of education and technical assistance. So the USHCC has been acting as a technical assistance bridge to small businesses out there, particularly our members who are having problems either access the forms to apply for the SBA funding, or are having problems with any corporation who is a member of our community, of our family. So we are trying to be that technical assistance bridge between those businesses. And we're trying to help as many businesses as we possibly can.
Thank you so much, LeRoy Cavazos. The U.S. Small Business Administration has deposed $18 billion for U.S. small businesses, but also have others. Facebook, SAP, like giving a number of millions of dollars. That's why we're partnering with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and with 75 other organizations so that we can make all the resources available in one place so that people cannot get lost, but find every resource. I want to conclude this weekly webinar. We went 15 minutes over, but I think it was absolutely worth. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And I want to thank again all our speakers, David Nabarro, Special Envoy of the World Health Organization for COVID-19, Gillian, Tett, Chair of the Editorial Board of the Financial Times, Bret Stevens, op-ed columnist of the New York Times, Cristina Antelo, Principal Ferox Strategies, LeRoy Cavazos, Vice President of Government Affairs of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Jesus Manta, Managing Partner of IBM. Every Tuesday at 11 o'clock, we'll have a weekly update on coronavirus for the Hispanic leadership to be informed, share information, and take better decisions. Until next Tuesday. Thank you so much,
Thank you, Claudia.
everybody. Bye.